Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Welcome to the 2020 Project Orchids series, and this is part 4, the shadier, cooler types. Little bit of a mix, some carried forward from the previous set from last year, but the only thing these have in common really is that I treat them relatively similar. In other words, I try and keep them cooler than some of the other stuff in here, and they stay in a shadier place literally, so they're not on top shelves, although I think there's an exception this year. Anyway, let's get going, and that was well thought out, wasn't it? This is my filming area for the project plant which now has gadgets all over it. The theory was, under normal circumstances, I can get at those. They're at my height. I can, that was the idea, which might mean that that they're going to get in some of the shots, but tough. The corner of the fan usually gets in the shots anyway. So right, let's get going with the first one. The first one is Dracula bela. This one had a lot of trouble during last summer, where it produced many spikes. I think probably about a dozen through the summer, and they all aborted before the buds started to swell. I'm assuming that was because the plant hadn't long been established after a repot, combined with a heat wave, combined with just not quite right. And at the end of the day, Dracula's like a higher humidity than I can maintain in warmer weather. So they suffer a little bit. But the plant didn't suffer. The plant grew on quite well. Now at the start of this project, what we've got is quite a few new growths on here. These are the nice greener leaves. We do also have some older leaves with some marks on. We've got a couple of black tips on leaves. Now I'd have to go back and look at older videos to find out how long they've been there and are they new. It's normally a sign of too much feed. Well, this one certainly doesn't get much, but sometimes in this arena, the Masdevallias and Draculas, a little bit is too much. So I'll have a look into that. But at the start of the project, what we've got is one spike. That's all there is. All there is showing at the moment is one spike. It's relatively new, and as far as the plant is concerned, the hook naturally hangs it in a certain position. I don't want to start playing around with that. And as I said, we've got many new growths on here, nice shiny new leaves in many places, and a single spike. So we'll see how that progresses. Hopefully, by the time we do the first update, much chances are that bloom may have come and gone. We shall see. Anyway, that's the first one. Right, the next one up is my Coelogyne cristata, and it's the variety Lemoniana. And unfortunately, if I'd got on and done this a few days ago, we'd have caught it in bloom. But it's just finished. The blooms fell literally a couple of days ago, so it's now not in bloom. But it bloomed this time for the first time in a few years, so we did actually get it to bloom. The idea of putting this one in is to see what happens now that it's bloomed and how it progresses. I've managed to keep the pseudobulbs nice and swollen. They're not all wrinkled and shriveled like some people who keep them a bit dry in the winter. I've kept them plump, so it's starting the year bustling with health, so to speak. It hasn't got to try and recover its shriveled pseudobulbs as part of the year's growth. It's ready to go now. And this is what I'm hoping, is that it'll now put on a nice lot of growth through the season, feed and water well. Possibly not in the middle of the year for this one, because the chances are it'll be a bit warm for it and it might stop growing. I mean, there is a Coelogyne site that recommends feeding in spring and autumn and leave the winter and the summer out, and either cut it right down or completely out altogether. We shall see. But the other, what looked like a spike, didn't materialise. It hasn't progressed, so I don't think it will now. I'll have a look round, see if we can see any signs of new growth. I don't think there are any, but it's got to be worth a look, hasn't it? Have a rummage in. Oh no, that's the spike I just cut off. Rummage. We've got one. I'll have to turn. That looks like a new growth there. I can't see any others, so it looks like it is just thinking about starting to come back into growth. So we will see how that progresses through the year. There are plenty of places where it can start new growths. It's just a matter of it getting on with it, basically. And we'll see how far we get with that. I would expect to see at least 4 or 5 new growths. And as it's settled in its tray thing now, providing it doesn't dry out, which I was just looking at it, this moss is quite dry, it's quite good. It's a little bit of an indicator the way this is done, because it's lined with moss, but the media it's actually growing in is a mixture of small bark and moss. When the outside starts to look dry, the inside still has some moisture in it, but it tells me it needs some water, and it's visible. I can see it from a distance. I don't have to pick it up and see how heavy it is or anything. I can see the colour of the moss tells me, and it needs some water now, so I'll give it some, and we'll move on to the next one. And the next one, although this is in the shadier, cooler set, this is the exception to the rule at the moment, purely as an experiment. This one has been moved up onto a higher shelf to see if it'll trigger blooming. It's a pretty strong, healthy plant, and it hasn't bloomed since I got it some time ago. As far as the health of the plant is concerned, it chucks up new growths all the time. There's new growths in here everywhere you look. Yeah, lots of new growths, and they come up as nice sort of shiny, healthy leaves. There's plenty of them. They're growing all the time. There's more. And what I've got on here is a couple of manky leaves. And every now and again, a leaf will turn yellow and fall. But nowhere near at the rate that the new ones replace them, so I don't worry too much about it. I mean, Draculas and Masdevallias do lose older leaves. It's, you know, it's just part of them. If not, they would have taken over the world by now, wouldn't they? So anyway, I've got a pretty healthy plant that seems to be growing well for me. It just lacks the blooms. So I'm hoping that since it went up in a higher light situation, that some of these new growths may actually come into bloom sometime down the line, which would be good. But at the moment, no luck and no signs, just more and more new growths. So we'll see if we can get this one to bloom. That's why I've included it. And the next one is one of the 3 Miltoniopsis I got at our 60th anniversary show last year. They weren't in the best of condition. I'll leave the polite version up, as this plant's got some history. But they had virtually no roots, stick to one even though they're a set of 3. So this one didn't really have a root system as such. The base of the plants were very, very wet. The media they were in was soggy, to say the least. I know Miltoniopsis like to be moist, but not soggy. There is a difference. Since it was potted up in a looser media with some holes in the pot, it has done some new roots. So it's progressing slowly but surely, I'm going to call it. Very attractive blooms, and what we have on this plant is we have a new growth here coming up from here. That's pushing on, but is still a young growth. And then back round this side, we have another new growth that is starting to mature now. Miltoniopsis, basically, the growth doesn't show any signs of a bulb, and then it will finish its height, or virtually finish its height, and then it will start to expand, and the leaves push outwards, and then you can see the bulb, yeah, like that. And that's how they finish up, with of course the single leaf sticking out the top of the bulb. Trait of Miltoniopsis. Apart from the odd species, that's just how they are. So we'll see what we can do with this. I'd like to see some blooms on those new growths, but so far no signs, but they could. it is possible. Could push a spike up. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, so what I'm hoping from this really is to get some more new growth going if possible from the older parts of the plant. But we'll see how we go with this one. It's started to get pale recently, but I've just doubled up the shade netting because this was on a lower shelf, but with the low sun, once the sun gets its height, like from now on really, when it's higher in the sky, this shelf wouldn't have got the sun through the shade netting. But just for sort of March time, it does. With the second layer of shade netting on, it's okay. But these need to be quite shaded. Yeah, in the Oncidium Alliance, I would say these are some of the ones that do need to be at the shadier end, rather than some that will take quite good light, but not these. They have a natural paler colour to their leaves compared with others, which has got a grey tinge to it. It's difficult to describe, but it's not a bright shiny green like a lot of Oncidium Alliance plants. It's a greyish green, and they are naturally a bit paler, but that's a bit too pale at the moment. That will probably colour up now that it's got the second layer of shade netting, and we'll see how that one progresses. Hopefully we've got a year, yeah. Hopefully within a year we should see some blooms on that one. Now I've included this one, even it's a relatively new acquisition. I wouldn't class it as easy to grow either. It's a Miltoniopsis. Yes, it is one of the exceptions to the rule because it does often have two leaves coming out the top of the bulb instead of one. But it's a species. There are probably only about 4, maybe 5 species left in the wild now. Some of the original species are now extinct. So, you know, that's why I've got this one. Now, when I got it, roots were either nothing or very, very poor. But since I've got it, you can see there's a lovely little new growth pushing out there. So it is now growing, which is producing some new roots. And there's also some new roots coming out in other places. This growth here, I think, is relatively new, and it is now starting to push some roots out. And we do have some root activity in the pot. So it's gone from nothing to something. Yeah. So I'm just hoping that I can grow this well. It would be a very unusual feature to appear at a show. They're not classed as easy. But I'm going to see what I can do with it. I would love to see this bloom. Now I don't know. I haven't had it long, and it is only just about recovering. It's not in full active growth with a healthy root system yet. But I'm hoping that during this project I can get it to that state, even if I don't get it to bloom. But the good thing is it's made it, because certainly for a while I didn't think it was going to make it. I thought it had its chips, but it's going to make it. It's going to grow. So we'll see what we can do with that one. I've included a Paphiopedilum. This is a non-bloomer. Quite honestly, this should be dead. This should not be living. This was one of my daughter's plants. I set her some shelves up in a kitchen area, which sort of it's a very narrow kitchen, so it's not that far away from a window, so that she could try growing some other orchids besides phalaenopsis. And this was one of the ones she chose. And unfortunately, that was at the time that was leading up to her major surgery, and her plants just got left. They just got neglected, understandably so. And when she had to go in hospital, which to all intents and purposes may well have been it, as they say, she wasn't expected to come out, I bought all her plants down here, and this little Paphiopedilum had no roots and was limp and floppy, and to all intents and purposes there was no way I expected it to recover. I set it up in a small pot with some damp moss to see if I could get some roots to come back and to see if it would hydrate. It had no roots. It had one dead root on it, and that was it. Well, what it's done, it's literally, this must be 3 years ago now, so it hasn't really done much since, but we do now have some roots in the pot. So it has grown some roots, which is a good sign, and it has grown several leaves, but it's also lost a couple at the base. I don't know when this is going to bloom, or even if, but it's certainly in a better position to move on now. It's a single fan, and that's all it's ever been since it was bought. That's quite a few years ago now, so it's never started a new growth, but it has at least started some roots now. Beautiful patterning, and if you look at the leaves from certain angles, let's look at the new one, it shows best on there. It's almost got a black edging to it. It's actually the deepest of purples, and with that patterning they're very attractive, and purple underneath the leaves as well. So it's a very attractive plant in its own right, but they are a miniature, they don't grow huge, and quite unusual blooms, but whether we'll see blooms in the next year, singular, I really don't know. But it's alive and it has some roots. I don't know what it's going to do now. It might just grow another leaf. It might try and bloom. It might put up a new growth. Totally unpredictable. I haven't got a clue. So we'll follow this one, and you never know, in a year's time it might look exactly the same as it does now. We'll have to wait and see. Okay, so that's the set of 6 cooler, shadier types, and I'll say I've certainly kept at least one from last time, but without getting the list from last time I'm not quite sure. But yeah, those are they. It's a bit of an assortment. I know there's 2 Miltoniopsis in there, but they are very, very different plants. I mean, one's effectively a miniature, one's quite a giant hybrid, and they've got different circumstances going on. So that's the 6, and that's the end. Part 4 is the last of the first set of videos, and we'll revisit all of the orchids in 3 months' time, basically, where we'll get the same set of plants out into their 4 parts, filmed in exactly the same order, and we'll look back to this set of videos to see how they were like now, and then how they progressed in 3 months' time. So we'll revisit them in 3 months' time and see how they're doing. Thanks for dropping by. Hope you're enjoying this set, but there's quite a pause now before we visit the orchids again. See you next time.